It's always fun when you press the start button and nothing actually displays on YouTube. Something's happening. Uh, Good. I think that works. I think that works. Today's been today's been an interesting day where things just haven't been working as well as they should be. Gotta laugh, gotta laugh. Hello, coders. I hope you're having a good week. Um, today we're going to be doing an installation of Symfony in Docker, and I'm also going to be talking and showing you some tricks around Docker volumes and bind mounts. Um, I say tricks; these are quirks. Well, they're not really quirks. It's kind of how it works, but it can trip. Well, it certainly tripped me up, right? But you can actually use these quirks and tricks and stuff in everyday use, which is really handy. So I'll be showing those later. I'll put links to all of this after it gets processed, so you can skip to that point later. Um, I did attempt to try and do this beforehand. I did this a couple of weeks ago and it failed. So hopefully it will work, and hopefully it will sound a little bit better as well. So I'm just going to do a sound off and make sure that everything is working before I jump in. The network is looking rather slow at the moment in terms of the what the bits and pieces that are streaming. So I do apologize if it does look a bit fuzzy. But what I'm going to do is just double check a couple of things before I jump into here. That looks fine. Good, and that's fine. Excellent. Okay. So before I start, I'm just going to give you a run through as to what I've been doing as a developer, freelance developer first, and then we'll dive straight into the code. So this week has been incredibly busy. This week being Wednesday today and the end of last week. Lots and lots of stuff to do with unit tests, acceptance tests, API tests, lots of tests basically, lots of PHP stan stuff as well. So lots of tidy up work, lots of basically confidence building of how certain applications that I've been working on are. And yeah, some interesting. I think I will do a video at some point demonstrating PHP stan and Codeception, the thing I use to test PHP, and the Docker environments as well that were set up specifically for those toys, and also in the Jenkins spiel. I did a video beforehand about Docker and Jenkins and stuff, so I might do a sort of a follow-on to that where I actually test a PHP application. Hey, it could be even this application that I build today, but today really is just going to be focusing on installing Symfony 4 in Docker, and we're going to use Dockerfile. We're going to do create a Docker compose file. We're going to create some volumes, and then once the site is running, basically just a simple Symfony installation. I then will talk about some nuances with Docker volumes and bind mounts, because it tripped me up last week, and I did put a tweet in it about the issue I had, but I don't think that tweet really explained fully what it was that I was facing. So anyway, enough of my ranting, enough of my babbling. Let's get into the code, because this is what we're all here for. So what I'm going to do is just dive over to the code section here. Don't worry about the invalid VCS route mapping. This is just some random message that PHP Storm gives me from time to time. So this is the Docker file that we're going to be using. I will be updating this throughout this journey. I will explain all these bits and pieces, but really these are quite bare bones. We have a Docker file here. We have a Docker Compose file. I'll talk about that in more detail. We've also got a config folder where we've got a virtual host. So let's go into each one of these individually. Let's focus first on the Docker file. So the Docker file is using the PHP 7.30 version of PHP using the Apache 2, using Apache. So that's the official PHP Docker repository, or the registry of PHP in the Docker Hub, I should say. And then on line 3, we're doing a run instruction. So this run instruction, so at this point we've already got PHP, we pulled that down. We're doing a curl request to install Composer. So we're installing Composer, and we're piping that installation that we've downloaded into PHP, and we're passing in some arguments. So we're installing, this is the installation directory that we're putting, and that is, can you see that on the screen? Yeah, I think you can. So that's installed, that's the argument, and the value is user local bin. So basically Composer will be installed in user local bin, and we're also giving it the file name of Composer, because by default it's composer.far or par, or however you pronounce it. So we're changing that to be Composer. So it will be a binary that we can use. So we can just type out Composer in the Docker container. Okay, so we've installed Docker. We've installed Composer. Fine. After that, what we're going to do is we're doing an apt-get update and an apt-get install of git and libzip and unzip, because these are going to be used when we're going to install bits and pieces from the Composer JSON file. Note that we don't have one of those yet, and I will be setting that up. Okay, so after that, we're doing this Docker PHP ext install of zip. So this is installing the zip extension of PHP. And then what we're doing is we're passing some things in to enable rewrite and headers for Apache. So we've installed Apache in PHP, and this single run instruction does all of that in one hit. So it installs Composer to this directory with this file name, and then the slash here denotes that we're now working on the next line. So we then do an and. So we're buttering this up. So we're saying, okay, do that and do this and do that. Notice that we've got the -y flag in here. So this is going to say yes to the prompts. Then after that, we are then doing the installation of zip, and then we're also doing the enabling of rewrite and headers of Apache. So that's the single run instruction that we're going to issue. Then after that, we're going to be copying everything in the current working directory to var www.html. Okay, so that's that bit sort of explained. Then after that, I'll show you the docker compose.yaml. So this is the YAML file, however you pronounce it. We're using version 3.4, and we've got a single service, which is just called app. We have the ports, and what we're doing here is we are exposing port 80 of the container, and we're publishing that to port 80 of the host. Once we've done that, we're going to set some environment variables. So the environment variable that we're setting is Apache document root. We're setting that to the value of var www html app and then public. So Apache document root is the environment variable that we're going to be basically baking into the Docker file or the Docker image, and that environment variable will be used in the virtual host, and I'll talk about that in just a second. After we've done this, or the next thing I should say, because it doesn't happen in a sort of a linear thing, we've got the build. So I mean, this could go up here, it doesn't really matter in the order in which these go in. So we have the build, and we're saying that the context of the build is the current working directory, which is right, because we are here, which has the Docker file in it. So the context in which the Docker file is this one. So that's fine. We're also setting up some volumes, and these are bind mounts. We're saying that, well, this one here, we've just got a single period sign, a full stop, if you will. So this is saying that anything in this working directory, which is the current working directory we're in, we want to put into var www.html. Now, if you wanted to, you could do some clever things to remove the Docker file and the Docker Compose file and the virtual host and so on and so forth. You can do things like Docker ignore and all of that jazz. But I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole too far today. I might pick that up later on. Let's just try and get this to work first. And then after this, the next volume that we're supplying is is if I press Control Z on that. That's not good. There we go. Config and then virtual host or vhost conf. So this is this file here. We're saying that we want to bind this, so bind the virtual host.conf into etc apache 2 sites available and then 00 default .conf. So we're essentially, I'm not going to say copying because that's wrong, but we are saying that the virtual host, the conf file here in the vhost, will eventually be this file within the container. Yeah, and that is the default file that is used by Apache to bring up a website for the virtual host. So let's go and take a look at the virtual host. So let's open that up. So the virtual host is it's a standard virtual host. That's all I'm going to say. We're saying that it's running on port 80. Anything on port 80 now works within this virtual host. We're setting the document root. Now, remember the environment variable that we set, the Apache document root, which we set in the compose file here. So this value, var www.html app public, will be in here. It will also be in this directory. Now, we've also got other things like options and directory index to index.php and so on and so forth. These are just the standard virtual host stuff. Again, you know, when I work on the, you know, my everyday job, it isn't this basic. Isn't this sort of vanilla, if you will. There's all sorts of other things going on. But sometimes it's nice to just go back to the raw sort of simple installation. Otherwise, I find that if you start adding too many complex stuff into the virtual hosts, into the config, into the Docker files, without actually running these things and actually seeing if they work, then you won't actually know where the issues lie. So let me just double check a couple more things before we start playing. So up here, this is where the terminal window is. I don't normally have the IDE set up like this. In fact, I don't normally use the IDE, which is PHP Storm, to do the command line stuff. I'm usually just in xterm, iterm, or something similar, and I use that. But just to keep it all in one shop, I'm just going to remove that error because that's annoying me. Just to keep it all in one shop, I want to put it up here. And I didn't want to put it at the bottom because that's where I'm superimposed, and that would be an issue. So anyway, let's just take a look at where I am. Let's just do an ls. We should see that we have a Docker file, a config, a Docker Compose file too. And if I did a cat, not a cat of Docker file, that is exactly the same thing as we're looking at here. So, you know, we're working on the same thing. I just want to double check. I keep wanting to flick back to the stream just to make sure, because the health is not very nice. So I do apologize. Hopefully this is going to work. I am going to be downloading a lot of stuff in this stream, so there might be a little bit of glitching here and there. But anyway, we have the Docker file created. We have the Docker Compose file created. This is all good. And I'll just come out of that. Let's just do a clear down of the screen, make some room, which is all well and good, all good and shiny. So what I can do is build the Docker Compose file. Now, I think, I did try and play with this a few minutes before the stream. So let me just see if I probably haven't tidied everything up. So let me just double check. So Docker images. Well, first of all, let's just do a Docker ps-a just to make sure. Yeah, we don't have any containers. That's good. I sorted that up. And then let's do a Docker images. Okay, so I'm going to do a system prune. So I'm just going to do a prune. Yeah, to remove all of those. Let's do a Docker images again. Yep, good. Okay, so we already have the PHP installed. In fact, I've got it installed. I have tagged it as well as, never mind, whatever, that's fine. So we've already got that as a base image, so we're not having to pull that down, which is fine. And again, if I go to Dockerfile, we can see here, this is the image that we're pulling, so 7.3.0 Apache. So it will use the image that has already been downloaded, which is 378 megabytes. So I'm saving that, which is nice. So let me clear down the screen again, and let's run the Docker Compose file. So if the Docker images haven't been built, and I go into great depth in the Docker in Motion course that I did for Manning, as well as the other courses that I've done for other people, in how Docker images get created. And I'm not going to go through all of those things straight away or today even, because I mean, that deserves its own stream, essentially. But basically, well, not basically. This isn't basic, is it? I mean, come on, this is Docker. Docker isn't a walk in a cake, is it? So, what we're doing is we're going to do a Docker Compose up, and a Docker Compose up will first of all look and see whether or not any containers need to be recreated. After that, if there is a container and there's been changes to the Docker Compose file, it will then recreate those. But we don't have any containers yet. We don't even have any images yet. Well, we do. We have the base image, but we don't have this image. We don't have the image with Composer in it. So what it will do is it will build that. Now I could do Docker Compose and then build to build that, but what I would like to do is build it and bring it up. So I'm going to do Docker-compose, and then it's just up, and I want to do it in detached mode, so up-D. So press enter on that thing, and it's going to fly through this, I hope. So this is now, so what this is doing is it's done the curl, so that's already done, and it's doing the apt-get update, apt-get install of these various bits and pieces. And I can hear my iMac taking off, so hopefully the stream won't get too jittery whilst this is happening, and this should just fly. Now, I should say that this won't actually build the website. It will build the website, but it won't work. And the reason why it won't work is because there are some things that we need to do to the Docker Compose file to enable things to happen for Symfony to run. I mean, we haven't even got to the point where Symfony is being installed yet, but I think I skipped ahead of myself there. My brain is a mush. So, right. Apologies. If I wasn't doing this live stream, that would be completely edited out and I would start again. So we have just created the Docker Compose PHP app 1. So that is the container that we've just created. We've just built the image, which is fine. And this is what I was saying before. If we wanted to rebuild this image, we would run Docker Compose up build. So if I did Docker ps-a like that, we should see that we have this container. And we can dive into that container. We could do it through Docker Compose, but I'm just going to do Docker exec-it and then jump into here and then go in as bash. So now I'm within that container. I'm no longer on the host. I'm now in the container. And if I did an ls, we can see that we have the Docker file, the config, and the Docker Compose file that was in here. And the reason why we've done that, we've got that, is because of this copy statement. We have copied everything from here, from this working directory, into var www HTML, which we are in. And also, we, in the Docker compose file just here, we had set up an Apache environment variable. So I could do something like this. I could do an echo of this variable, and that would return this because we've baked that into the image. Also, what I could do is I could go to cd, which is wrong, cd, and then I could go to etc Apache 2, and then sites enabled, or sites available, sorry, and I could cat out 000 default.conf, which is this one here. Now this is going to be, if I press enter, exactly the same as the config.vhost, because in the Docker compose file we have set that up as a bind mount. Now that's important, a bind mount, and I'll be talking about the differences between bind mounts and volumes when we get to the tricks about the volumes after we get this installed. So that's all good. I'm going to go back to cd, where was it, var wub, and then HTML. Okay. Now also remember, if we go back to the Dockerfile, what we did in this run instruction is we did a curl request to install Composer, and we've put that into user local bin. So if I go into, let's just do an ls of user local bin and Composer, there we go. So we have Composer because we've given it the file name of Composer, which means if I was to just clear that down, if I was to do Composer like so, --help, we have Composer. That is how you would install Composer into your Docker container, your Docker image, which is great because now that means that we can actually start using or installing frameworks and dependencies inside this container. So, which is exactly what I'm going to do. Right, let's just clear down that screen. We're still in the container. I am going to run a command, which I'm just going to pull from my notes because I can never get this right. There we go. Can I paste that in? Yeah. So this is the Composer command that will create the project from the Symfony website skeleton. It's going to create it in the folder of app. So if I press enter, we'll get this warning, and don't worry about that for this. In this context, this is just an example. So this is going to then install Symfony, and it's going to do so in a folder called app. So we'll just wait for this to run through. There is quite a few packages to download, so it might take a wee bit of time. Therefore, I'm going to have a slurp of my tea. Now, the thing to remember here is that we're installing this within the container. And we've bind mounted the current working directory, or in the Docker compose file, we've bind... Whoops. My computer's trying to catch up with itself. So we've bind mounted var ww to this container. That's what I was trying to say. We've bind mounted it, right? So we can now see, look, we can see we've got the app directory, we've got the vendor directory. This is on our host machine. This is the host machine. This is the container, right? So that's all well and good. Let's just remove all those errors. That's fine. It's just going to keep going, isn't it? It's just going to keep coming up with these warnings and errors. So what I was trying to get to with that is that we're not only installing this into the container, but we're also installing this into the host machine. So you got to be careful. You got to be careful as to where your vendor lives, and or where your project lives, because that's an awful lot of packages. Also, with your volumes, your Docker volumes, they can be detached from your container. Another container can then attach itself to that volume, which is very handy. I've used this in so many different instances, so many different examples I could give you where I've shared a volume to multiple containers. One I did quite recently was to just pull out some logs. So I would do a Docker volume for logs and then pass the logs into that, and then I had another container that was obviously not public facing, and it was able to attach to the log Docker volume and then do some analysis on the logs, which was pretty neat. There was no need to install the monitoring or the metrics or the log stuff in the actual initial container where the logs were being produced. I could just have a separate container that just did one thing and one thing well, which was just analyzing those logs. And that's what I used. But anyway, I will stop baffling on, because this is now apparently installed, which is all good. If I went into the vendor, we can see it all there, which is all good. We can also see the JSON file and the JSON lock file. Let's just take a look at the JSON file. So these are all the packages that were installed. Oh my word, there's so many for Symfony. Although these are fine. These aren't. I say it like it's JavaScript. This isn't a node modules folder, right? Anyway. So let me just clear down that screen. Let me just check a couple of other bits and pieces as well. Okay. Okay, that's all good. That's all good. We're just trying to get rid of all these stupid errors. It's trying to index everything, and I don't want it to. Go away. Stop it. Stop indexing. Right. So let me just double check the stream, make sure everything is good. Right. What I'm gonna do is I've just gone to the browser and I've just refreshed the page, which is this one. Yep, there we go. And this is running on the IP of the well, I'm using Docker machine, which is a completely different talk in itself. But this Docker machine has a IP address, which is 192.168.99.100, and this is because I'm exposing and publishing port 80. So I'm exposing port 80 to the from the container, and then publishing that to the host. I can now access the website. The problem we face is that we have this this issue with logs and with caching. This is a usual headache with things like Symfony, where they need to have these to be not only writable by the PHP itself, as in by the composer running that, so by whoever has ownership of that, which is usually root or 1000, the UUID, but also by Apache too as well, because Apache is obviously writing things to the log files as well as creating the caches and stuff, and that gets a bit troublesome. That gets a bit of a headache. So one thing I suggest doing, especially when you're dealing with it locally, because when you're doing it locally, there's less of an issue with perhaps permissions, because you're not pushing this up to production. I certainly recommend that if you are pushing something up to production, then you have a separate Docker Compose file, or you create your Docker Compose file in such a way that has different triggers for the different environment. Okay, so with development and test, and usually I work on development, staging, and production. And there can be a couple of stages in between, like perhaps there's stages that do load testing or specific tests to check for the how fast these acceptance tests run, as I was doing this week. But what you want to make sure is that you have different Docker Compose files for each one of those things. And I like to separate it out to having a Docker Compose.dev, .prod, .test, .staging, or what have you, because that means that it is just simply that file. And you can string Docker Compose files along, so you can use a -f and then the file, and then -f and then another file, and so forth and so forth. And there is a way of chaining them together, which is fine. However, I find that especially if you're dealing with anything in production, there is the element of human error there if you forget to chain something together. And also, if you go and change something in a Docker Compose A, and that's not reflected in Docker Compose B, or it is reflected but in the wrong way, then you have to remember, this isn't just affecting this one stage, it's also affecting this stage, and so forth. Anyway, this isn't a talk on deployment at all, so I do apologize. I'm just going off on a rant. So let's go back onto the code. The way to get around this, especially in development, is if you go into the Docker Compose file, just make sure that is there on the stream, which is all looking all good. So the way to get around this, of course, is to go into the Docker Compose file and actually make some volumes. These are Docker volumes. These aren't bind mounts. Even though we've bind mounted, we've bound, shall I say, the current working directory like so. What we can do is we can do volumes, and I'm going to do one for cache. And I'm going to do one for log. Now, because we're doing it locally, there's no need to have any additional configuration about the volume drivers, although you might want to do something if you're on a different sort of host machine, maybe. You can have different drivers. So if you're using things like DigitalOcean or AWS or anything like that, they might have their own way of having volumes that you can use. So you would apply those drivers to this configuration layer. So what I'm going to do is underneath. Now this is important. You have to do it underneath this one here. In fact, I'm going to do it right at the bottom just to make a point. If I can get my mouse over here. Right. You need to do it underneath. So we're going to make a cache volume, or we're going to assign the Docker volume cache to var wub HTML. I believe it's in, let's just double check. It's in app var and then here. Yeah. So it is HTML app. If I can find the A on the keyboard, that'd be lovely. Var and then cache. Like that. And then again, we're going to do the same, but for log. Like so. So what we're doing is we're setting up a Docker volume, or two Docker volumes, in fact. These will not be removed when the container gets removed. That is an important point I want to make. These are separate Docker objects. They have their own Docker ID. They are completely independent of the container. However, what we're doing is we're attaching the service to the Docker volume. So we're attaching the app to these Docker volumes. So we have the cache and we have the log. And notice we are attaching cache to the var cache directory, which is inside var www.html, which is inside var www.html, the thing that we've just done a bind mount on. So I'm going to just save this. Sorry, my phone just went off. I'm going to just save this. And what am I going to do? I'm going to do an exit of the container. Let's just do a quick ls to make sure that we are in the right space. That's all good. We're going to do a docker compose. We're going to do a down to bring the containers down. So that's down. And then what I'm going to do is do a docker compose up -d to bring them up. And notice it's saying creating volume, which is here, Docker PHP compose cache with the default driver. You can find these actually by doing docker volume. I always get that wrong. I always put an S on the end. ls. So these are the volumes that we've created. So they are completely different, as in independent from the actual containers. So docker ps-a, because we've just spun that up. And that's all good. Now, the thing to note is that because the previous attempt of this created the var cache, that is still in play and it has been put into the Docker volume. Ideally, what I should have done is just cleared that out and then created the volume. So I'll dive onto that. I'll also probably hack up the permissions, but let's just bear with me just a second. So I'm going to do a reverse search back into bash. So that gets me into the container, and I'm going to go into cd. Where are we? App var. Let's just do an ls-al. So yeah, these are all. God damn, my mouse is so light. So yeah, you can see that these are owned by root and so forth. So what I'm going to do is just do a simple hack. Don't do this on production. Do not do this on production, but I just want to get this done quickly. 777 of, where are we, cache, and also log. Boom. Let me just double check a couple of things. Boo, 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 boo. Okay, good. So let's just exit out of view. Actually, no, let's keep that going. I'm going to go to the browser now and then refresh the page. So let's do that. And boy, we've got Symfony installed. Woo, Symfony 4.2.2. That is now running. Boom, boom. Okay. So, yay, we've got Symfony running in a cozy container. So let's now talk a little bit. I'm going to just change the change it to the big screen. Let's now talk about the Docker volumes. And let's just sort of first of all do a recap over what we used, because we used both bind mounts and we used Docker volumes. We first created the Docker volume. Sorry, we first created a bind mount of the current working directory, and then we installed Symfony in that via the container. Because we were bind mounting that file setup went into the host machine. I'll just show you. We go into the code. So all of this stuff, which is behind my head in app, that was created because we built that through Composer within the container, and because it was bind mounted, which is here. We had an issue with permissions with both the cache and the log directories, and we got around that by creating a Docker volume for both of those things, and we put them below the bind mount. So that's an important point. We put them below the bind mount, and I'll talk about why that's important in just a second. I'll give you a whole demonstration in just a second as to why that is important. The order in which you put your volumes is extremely important. And yeah, we hacked up with the permissions, but that's, you know, whatever, that's fine. We wouldn't have had to have done that had I have not had some existing cache stuff already in there. So that's okay. What I'm going to show you now is how we can actually do this whole process within the Dockerfile. So in the Dockerfile, we're going to actually do a composer install. So let's say, for example, that you are pushing this to a completely new server. All right, you're a completely new server. The question is, what do? Do you save all of your vendor stuff, all your vendor bits and pieces in Git? The answer is hell no. No. You don't do that at all. The whole point of Composer is having the composer.json file and the lock file. The lock file is the snapshot. If we go into here, we can actually see the exact versions, the exact Git references of all of the packages that we've created. This is the golden key, if you will, of the installation of our vendor directory. Fine. But what happens then if you want to deploy this to another completely fresh server, and you also want to install all of your vendor bits and pieces through a Dockerfile? So all you have to do is just do a docker compose up. It builds it, installs all of the dependencies, and then there you go. There's no need to do any Composer stuff on the host machine. Now, this is something that I've been working on fairly recently with one of my clients, because we have several stages, if you will. We've got development, we've got production, obviously, we've got other mini stages in between. And we use multi-stage builds in Docker, in a Dockerfile. I haven't talked about what a multi-stage build is. I will definitely do so in a future video, so don't worry about that. But these multi-stage builds allow us to create different stages or different states of the Docker image. And those get deployed to various servers and various bits and pieces. Production, for example, doesn't have any of the development dependencies. It doesn't have any of the testing dependencies. Test does, right? So of course it does. It also has things like the stuff that really slow down an application. So profiling tools and Xdebug and all of that jazz, which you wouldn't put on production. So instead of doing a deployment script where we would SSH into a box, do the Docker bits and pieces, and then after that do a compose install. After we've done that, we wanted to have these singular images, and these singular images are basically snapshots of the application. And this is a very common thing. This is a very common thing to have. I'm not saying that this is the right way of doing it. I'm not saying that this is the wrong way of doing it. There's many ways to deploy an application. This is just a way of doing such a thing. So let's say, for example, we go onto the server and we do a Docker build, right? So we have some form of script, does a Docker build. So we need to have some way of installing Composer, all of the Composer dependencies from within the Docker file. So just to replicate this, let's just get out of here, so which is out of the container. So we're now on the host machine. I'm going to just do an rm -rvf and remove everything from the app vendor directory. Boom. Okay, so we don't have the vendor directory anymore. So we just have the Docker file, Docker compose file. We've still got the vhost, and we've also got some small bits and pieces here. We've got the compose.json file and the lock file and so forth. Now, the first thing we would do is we would have another run instruction. And this run instruction would just do composer install. and that would do a composer install of the composer file. Obviously, we also need to change the working directory, so we're going to do work dir. That will be into here /app. So let's say that the app directory was on the server, for example, but the vendor stuff wasn't. Because we didn't commit any of that into the Git repository, or however we've pushed all of this stuff up. We didn't push up the vendor stuff. The vendor goes with the Docker file. In fact, we could, if we wanted to, do a require in here to build the application and then adjust the other volumes and stuff in here. I could have done this to give you more of a rounded example. I won't, because that's going to take a little bit of time. But for now, though, what this is saying is we're going to install Composer as we've done before, and we're going to install all the other packages, enable all the bits and pieces like we've done before, copy everything from the working directory into var www.html. We're then changing the working directory to var www.html app, which is in here, and then we're going to run composer install, and that's going to build the vendor directory and Symfony and all that jazz inside the container, not inside the host machine, inside the container. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just do this now. So I'm going to just double check a couple of things. First of all, I think that's good. I do apologize if my screen is flashing or like there's blocks of black stuff flying about. I don't know why that is. It's a bit annoying. Let's just run, where am I? Let's do an ls. Right, let's do a Docker. Do I have the things up? Docker ps-a. Yes, we do. So let's just do a down to bring them down. We're going to do a Docker. Remember, we still have the volumes. Let's just do a Docker volume ls. So we still have those volumes. Those volumes are still intact. If I wanted to, I could do a Docker volume, if I can spell it, rm, and we can remove that one. It doesn't really matter. And the other one, I shan't do that though, not yet. So let's just build these up. So let's just do a build. That's not right. That's a completely different project that I was working on. That's part of the front-end service of, of one of the courses that I was building. Anyway, whatever. So Docker compose, build. So we're going to build it. In fact, I'm just going to do up-d, I believe, because what it'll do. Whoops, no, I didn't want to do that. I did need to do a build. Sorry, a build. Yeah. So that's fine. Okay, so this is going to now install all the bits and pieces inside the Docker image. All right, so it's inside the Docker image, and it's going to be in the image. And therefore it's going to be in the container afterwards. Just remember, if I go back to the Docker Compose file, we are bind mounting the current working directory to var www.html within the container. Okay, so let's just keep an eye on this folder. Let's just do an up. I think that's in the history up. So there we go. Let's do a Docker ps-a to make sure it's up. It's up. Now notice there's no vendor here. No vendor whatsoever. Not one bit. Okay? The reason is that we created and installed all the bits to do with Composer within the Docker image. The container has been built from that Docker image. Let me just double check a couple of things. And if I did a bash, jumped into the container, did an ls, so notice that we are now in app because the working directory has changed. Notice we don't have the vendor directory. Why is that? We've just installed it. Why don't we have it? Why don't we have the vendor directory? Well, we don't have the vendor directory because, and this is part of the quirky trick, if you will, that I was wanting to demonstrate. We don't have the directory because we haven't said that we would need to have it in the volumes. We haven't got it in the working directory, sorry, the host machine, because we never built it in the host machine. We built it in the image. We didn't assign that to be in the container. Okay, so the fact is, these volumes are really important, really important, because what we're doing here is we're saying that we are attaching, or we are bind mounting, I should say, the current working directory into here. Okay, and this gets done at runtime. So as soon as we run this, that gets attached. Now notice, when we do an up, I should say, when we do a Composer up, that gets attached. So yes, we installed all the Symfony stuff within the image. Sure, fine, no problem. However, when we did an up, what we did is we overwritten that directory, that vendor directory, with what we have in our bind mount. And in the bind mount, in the host machine, we don't have vendor. So that was removed. That just didn't exist. So, and this was a problem that I faced a few weeks ago, where the build was working. The build was great and worked fine, and it was coming out that everything was being installed, all the bits and pieces were done. However, when it came to actually attaching a container to the image, or building a container from the image, I should say, there was no vendor directory. And in fact, it wasn't just that; it was other things as well that were just not there. The reason why is that I had a Docker volume that, I had a bind mount that was overriding that. So how do you get around this? How do you go about doing this? Well, we've kind of solved this already, but in a different way. What we need to do is we need to create another volume, and we need to call it vendor. And we must have this underneath this bind mount. So var HTML. This is going into app, and then vendor. Okay, so it goes down in order. So it's going to bind mount it. It's going to then obviously bind mount the vhost. That's fine. It's then going to attach the cache to var cache, overriding anything in this bind mount. It's then going to do the same thing with log, overriding anything in this bind mount. It's also going to do the same to vendor, overriding anything in the bind mount. So let's go ahead and run that again. So I need to come out of here. I'm going to just quickly do a down to bring these down. I say these, it's only one. And then I'm going to do a build. Well, yeah, I'll do a build. And that will run through all of these things. I think that's the right order. I got a bit too keyboard happy. So that's installing all the bits and pieces. And then I'm going to do an up. So it creates the Docker volume, which is composer vendor. I'm just going to double check a couple of things. Good. Okay, let's just now Let's dive back into here. This VCS routing. If anyone knows how to get rid of these stupid messages, just drop me a line, because when things come up on the screen, it really frustrates me. So let's do an ls. Well, so we're in the app directory, but look, yay, we have our vendor directory. But we didn't have it before. So let's do an ls of what's in vendor. And yeah, we've got Symfony. We've installed Symfony. Woo! So I should therefore be able to go to the browser. Let's refresh the old screen here. And there you go. Bob's your uncle. We have the Symfony 4.2.2 installed. Now, what I'm going to do is just quickly recap what happened with the order in which these work, and what happened and why it failed last time. So let's just go back to the code. So the secret sauce is this bit here, line 21, vendor var www HTML app vendor. This here is really, really important, and you need to put it in below the bind mount. The reason why is that when you bind mount the current working directory into var www, the host machine that you're bind mounting from doesn't have vendor at all. Yes, it has this, but it's empty, right? Then, once that's happened, it will do the same thing with the conf. That's fine, but it'll get to the cache directory and the log directories. These, whatever is in these Docker volumes, are now within here. And it's the same for vendor. And we installed the Symfony and all the composer dependencies in the build. So what Docker is doing is it's saying, okay, fine, let's just install all the bits first of all into the Docker image. Let's just process the volumes here. Okay, I can see that vendor needs to be in there, so we're going to take everything from vendor and we're going to put it into here. Same with log, same with cache. We're also going to bind mount this, but because these happen, they override whatever is in var www HTML. Now this could be a really good solution, or it could be a complete pain in the backside, depending on what your use case is. Also, it means that because they're in a Docker volume, it means that you can share this with other things. So say, for example, you find a bug somewhere. Maybe it's on production, right? Or maybe it's on staging or whatever. And you want to utilize or attach a testing, staging container, if you will, something that isn't public facing, but you want to attach the same setup that production or another server has, then you can do so using the Docker volumes. And like I said, if you had different ways of configuring your Docker Compose files, you can share the Docker volumes between the two, and also you can do clever things with running it through networks and other crazy jazz as well. Just remember though that when you are setting up your Docker Compose file, it's going to be running. It's going to be creating the packages, or the containers, I should say. It's going to be naming those by the project that you're in. So, for example, if I came out of this container and then did a docker ps-a, you can see that it's docker PHP composer app and then one. One being that you could have more than one container associated or attached or created from the image. So you could have app 2, app 3, app 4, and so forth. But the fact that it's Docker PHP Composer is the fact that we are in Docker PHP Composer projects. So you've got to be careful there that you name your structure correctly. And the fact it's called app. Whoops, it's be called app because that is the service name, which is app. But for example, if you wanted to spin up another container and you wanted to attach, say it was a container that you weren't exposing those ports, or it's just internal use or whatever, then you could do so. You could attach it through these Docker. So you could share these. What I'm saying is you can share these Docker volumes amongst all these containers that you've got. And I work on like crazy amounts of bits and pieces, containers, images on a daily basis. So it's nice to sort of like flip in between the two, so or all of them, as it were. But I hope that has kind of explained the differences between, or the nuances between Docker volumes and Docker bymounts. I know that this is a subject that is questioned regularly. I get lots of questions about Docker volumes and why things are being installed in the image, but they're not actually being represented in the volume. It is this single line change which makes the difference, because again, you've installed it in the volumes here, you've done a bind mount, but you don't actually have vendor in here, right? So you don't have that. And because this runs at runtime, it's going to just copy over everything from here into there. And if you don't have vendor in there, it doesn't matter what you've done in your Docker image, it's just going to override it. It's just going to override it, unless, of course, you've given yourself the ability to have a Docker volume of all the things that you want to use. And it's not just Composer. We're talking about node modules here. We're talking about the other bits and pieces for the other frameworks as well. And also, if you're sharing other like configuration or images, static stuff as well, that can all go in. So if you're doing any crazy processing in the Docker image, so in your Dockerfile, if you're doing anything that is generating or installing or creating files, directories, whatever, then make sure that they are represented somewhere in a Docker volume. Otherwise, they're going to be lost. And look, if I did a docker ps-a, let's just do it down. So I've removed it. If I did a Docker volume, it's still there, right? So I can just do a quick up. Whoops. Let me just do a. And there you go. It's installed. It's created, and that's fine. And I can also do a down. Whoops. And I can do a build. Now, why is it installing this again? This is the caveat. Why is it doing this again? Well, it's doing it again because in the Docker compose file, we're putting everything in the bind mount. So we've actually changed the image. Right, so we're saying that we don't actually have anything in the vendor we don't have vendor, so we're copying over it. Therefore, that's changed, which means that we now need to do another build. But do you see how quickly that came from? That went because it loaded it from the cache. So I can do an up. Whoops. And if I went back to the browser, it's still up. It's still done. It's all good. It's all good. So that's kind of a roundabout way of explaining Docker volumes and Docker bind mounts. I'm pretty sure that there's going to be other nuances and things that I can show you with other applications. We've done one with Jenkins. We've done. I want to do one with Elasticsearch because I'm digging that at the moment. And other things. There's really clever stuff that you can do with Go Access, which is the stuff that I've been working on with access files and log files and all of that stuff. But also I want to do a little bit more JavaScript. I don't want to just do all the back-end stuff. So yeah, I want to be focusing on the JavaScript. So we might be making some JavaScript apps in the future that run Docker or are used in Docker. So that'll be pretty cool. And also, this is Symfony. We can do all sorts of things with this. I might start building some command line bits and pieces, some console bits and pieces in here, and then perhaps even run those from the Docker files, maybe. Who knows? But I also, like I said beforehand, want to get into testing. I want to get into codeception. I want to get into all the other bits and pieces about the differences between acceptance testing, unit testing, integration testing, all those fun things that I want to do. I should say before I go, on Friday we have an interview with Adam Culp, who is a Rogue Wave / Zend consultant, the organizer of Sunshine PHP. Very interesting guy. Fantastic chat with him a few weeks ago. That is going live on Friday on this channel plus on the podcast. So if you haven't done so already, do check out the podcast, because I've done an interview with Tom Varell, who is very new to. He's a React developer. I interviewed him on the first week he started his React development job. He's a self-taught developer. So if you are learning stuff from scratch and you're teaching yourself and you haven't come from any kind of degree or college course or any kind of traditional study stuff, and you want to know how to get into this industry, do check out that interview. I've also done other interviews with I did one with Jeremy Onion, who went from being a programmer to being a manager. So we were talking about that shift and the differences between the two roles and how he progressed in his career. So do check that out too. I am also interviewing, hopefully, depending on schedules and stuff, in the next hopefully few days, I'll be interviewing a recruitment agent. And I'll be trying to get into the mindset of a recruitment agent, I'll be asking questions about what challenges recruitment agents face when recruiting developers, not just PHP developers, JavaScript developers, and so forth. So if you've got any questions that you want me to ask this recruitment agent, then do let me know, because then I can ask them. I've got a bunch of questions that I want to ask myself, but if you've got anything that you would like me to ask, then do ask that. If you haven't done so already, please do check out the podcast, and also do follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and all that other good stuff, and Facebook too. Thanks ever so much for watching. Happy coding, everyone. I'll see you again soon. Cheers. Bye.